Okay, it's Rabbi Pinchas Landis from Partners in Torah of Cleveland here with Back to the Past. For those of you who are watching this on Facebook, I apologize. For some reason, my Facebook Live just would not work. I am looking at the guilty culprit as the new Mac OS update. I forget what it's called, but whatever it is, I know it changed the color of my screen. Because I downloaded that today and everything was working fine until it came time to start the Facebook Live for Back to the Past. Just couldn't get it to do it. Tried to do it for 45 minutes. Couldn't get it to do it. Nothing I would do would make it work. So after about 45 minutes of trying to make that work, I just gave up and said, forget it. We're going to record this the way we always do. Record it for Facebook. We'll still upload it. We're recording it for YouTube. The way we record it for YouTube, we'll upload it this way for Facebook too. So it'll go on Facebook later tonight. Again, for those of you watching on Facebook, I apologize it wasn't live. I believe Apple is the culprit, not Facebook, but hey, hopefully we'll figure it out before next week. So be it as it may, we're here back for the 5th episode of Back to the Past, and tonight we're going to be talking about the time period of the Judges. This time period starts in the Jewish year 2533, which corresponds to 1228 before the Common Era, and this is a very interesting time period for the Jewish people. First of all, it's all spelled out in the second book of the Bible, the book of Judges, which tells the story of the 15 judges that ruled the Jewish people. Now, from the death of Joshua, which we discussed last week, until Samuel the prophet comes onto the scene as the final judge, if you will, the Jewish people are not united. It's almost like a republic, each tribe for themselves, each of the 12 tribes. At certain times they function together, at certain times they don't. At certain times there's strife between the 12 tribes, at certain times there's civil war between the 12 tribes. But be it as it may, that's the time period we have here, roughly a 350-year time period, which will bridge the gap of the Jewish unity we had at the times of Moses and Joshua to the time period we'll have starting with the prophet Samuel, but it'll pave the way into the kingdom of Saul, David, and Solomon, before, once again, the kingdom will split in two. You know, it's a funny thing for us Jewish people. We've only had a united Jewish people in the land of Israel for roughly 80 years, 70 years, which we'll discuss, or maybe it's 80 years, as we'll discuss next week. And the whole other time, we've had this time period with the tribes during the time of the judges when everyone was split and fragmented, and then once Rechavam takes over as the king of Israel, the kingdom is going to split into two, the northern kingdom, the southern kingdom, and even when we get to the second temple, it's a much different situation. So it's a funny thing for us Jewish people. We've only had everything in our idealistic state for a very finite period of time. Be it as it may, we can look at the time period of the Judges, and we can also take some solace in it, because we look at our situation today for the Jewish people when things are so fragmented and we have so many different groups vying for whatever they're vying for, and yet, you know, if we survive the time period of the Judges, we can survive this time period too. Okay, so let's jump right in and start talking about the time period of the Judges. So there's a point that I believe we have to start with, and that is that the temple is not built at this point. The Jews are in Israel, but the temple is not going to be built until Solomon comes around. Yet that Mishkan, that portable temple that traveled with the Jews in the desert, does come with them and will be during this time period in the city of Shiloh. Now, that being said, even though it's a central temple, if you will, of the Jewish people, in many ways it doesn't function that way, and many of the Jews don't look at it that way. And at this time period, we'll see that idol worship is fairly rampant amongst the Jewish people. We're going to see these alien forces that come in and have their influence on the Jewish people, and that the Mishkan is going to have its challenges with all of these things. And one of the interesting laws that exist during this time period is that Jewish people are allowed to have what are called bamos, which are basically private altars that people can have in their backyard. Like private temples, if you will. They could bring sacrifices on it. They would have the local Kohen come and bring the sacrifice. And even though it was allowed at this point, it's not going to be allowed, or it's not allowed when the temple is built. It's not allowed when the Mishkan comes to Jerusalem. It's not even allowed when the Mishkan is functioning in Shiloh. So those bamas become a problem, because we're going to see they pave the way in many ways to avodah zarah, to idol worship. So that is an issue that we definitely have at this time period. Be it as it may, the leaders that we're told about in the Bible at this time period are these shoftim, which translates as judges, which isn't necessarily the most accurate translation for what it is. Yes, the word shofet means judge in Hebrew, but it's not the most accurate description for what they were. Because from reading the book of Judges, you would think that these were some kind of elected or appointed or some sort of ruler that really ruled over the whole people. That's not really what it was. It was actually a debate in the Talmud if the judges were appointed by prophets like the kings of later were, or if they just rose to power themselves. It seems that the latter is the truth. They just rose to power. That they took on a leadership role, and they became the judges of the Jewish people. We can again look at our situation today, where we have leaders of the Jewish people who got there from just emerging as people who got things done, and that's essentially what the Shoftim were at their time period when they existed. Okay, so there were 15 of them in total, and we're going to see that even, as we mentioned before, that even in the time period of Joshua, most of the enemies of the Jewish people, and for sure the Canaanite nations in the land of Israel, had been subdued. We're going to see there's a lot of threats that are going to come from outside of the land of Israel. They're going to threaten the Jewish people during virtually 310 out of 350 years of the time period of the Judges. Okay. The very first of the judges was someone by the name of Asniel ben Kenaz, who came from the tribe of Judah. This time period starts, as we said, in the year 2533, the Jewish calendar, 1228 before the Common Era. And Asniel ben Kenaz is known as a great Torah scholar. I believe we mentioned last week that when Moshe died, many of the laws that Moshe taught were forgotten from the Jewish people, and Asniel came and taught them again anew to the Jewish people. And he rules for a total of 40 years. Now, during this time period when he's ruling, the Jews are threatened by a ruler by the name of Kushan Rishasayim, who comes from an area called Aram Naharaim, and he was sponsored by the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians were the ones who caused a lot of trouble, and he sponsored this Kushan Rishasayim to attack the Jewish people. Now, Kushan Rishasayim was a problem, and he literally killed hundreds of Jews, and he caused terror throughout the Jewish people. Now, eventually, Asniel is able to kill him through one special trait that he had, and that is he was left-handed. So we're told that when he came into Kushan Rishasayim didn't realize who he was looking at his right hand. Asniel comes with his left hand, is able to kill him with his left hand. And that is the end of Kushan Rishasayim, bringing a certain amount of peace during the time period of Asniel ben Kenaz. Now, what's interesting is in the book of Shoftim, the book of Judges, there are two situations discussed at the end of the book of Judges. But chronologically, they actually happened during the time period of Asniel ben Kenaz. It's a whole debate as to why they're put at the end of the book, if chronologically they took place at the beginning of the book, but we'll leave that for another time. These two events were what are known as Pesel Micha and Pilegesh Begiva. The story of Pesel Micha is there's a certain gentleman by the name of Micha who had an idol in his house, and we're told that certain people from the tribe of Dan came looking for a new plot of land for themselves. They came into the house of Micha. They saw that he had an idol. They took the idol. They burnt down the whole city. They avenged this idol worship that was going on. That was roughly the story of Pesel Micha. The story of Pilegesh Begiva is a little bit more complicated, that there was this concubine. Pilegesh is the Hebrew word for concubine. Concubine or Pilegesh is basically like a partial wife. We don't really have such a concept today in Judaism, but it definitely existed in biblical times. She was a concubine to a certain man, and there was a number of people from the tribe of Benjamin who essentially kidnapped her. They had their way with her, and it was a terrible, terrible atrocity performed by these members of the tribe of Benjamin. Now, afterwards, the outrage from this situation was so great that it led to a civil war between the other 11 tribes and the tribe of Benjamin, and it almost completely wiped out the tribe of Benjamin. There was a decree that no one from the other tribes could intermarry into the tribe of Benjamin for the next number of generations, and it was a horrible situation. Now, it's a whole debate and discussion as to what these two stories are doing there, why they're at the end of the book, not the beginning of the book. I'll give you at least one idea. My Rosh Yeshiva, Rav Yaakov Weinberg, said that the reason these stories are there are to tell us that even though throughout the time of the Judges there were horrible things that happened, there was idol worship, there were these licentious situations that went on, But you see in both situations they were met with outrage. Pesel-Micha was the people from the tribe of Dan who burnt the whole city down, and the story of Pilegesh Begivo, it was the rest of the Jewish people who waged war against the tribe of Benjamin. As if to say that even though there were these horrible atrocities of violation of the Torah, it was still considered very wrong and repulsive to most of the Jewish people, so much so that they were always put down in force when they happened. Okay? That was two of the events that took place during the time period of Asniel ben Kenaz. Now what's interesting is the next of the Shoftim to come up was someone by the name of Ehud ben Gera. Ehud ben Gera becomes a Shofti in the year 2472, that's a Jewish year, corresponding to 1188 before the Common Era. Now, what's really fascinating about Ehud ben Gera is that he was What's interesting about Ehud ben Gera is that he was actually from the tribe of Benjamin. So after this situation of Pilegesh Begivo, we see shortly afterwards the next shofet, the next ruler of the Jewish people, or the next one who emerges as the leader of the Jewish people, is from that tribe that literally sparked this civil war, which I think is indicative of how great of a person this Ehud ben Gera must have been, that he was able to go from this tribe to being the leader of the Jewish people. Now, one of the only things we know about him from the Talmud, from the Tanakh, is that he was a lefty. Now, this is significant because at that point, the Jewish people were being encroached on by Moab. Moab is the country to the east. It was to the east of Israel. It was the descendants of Lot, of our cousin or uncle Lot, and the king was known as Eglon. And because Ehud ben Gera was a lefty, when he came into Eglon was looking at his right hand, Ehud was able to take him on with his left hand, and he was able to kill him and put down Eglon. Now, Ehud ben Gera ruled for a total of 80 years. He was the longest ruling shofet, and that's really all we know about him. It's interesting that there's some shoftim we know a decent amount about, there's some shoftim we know very little about. Now, the next person who comes out is somebody by the name of Shamgar ben Anas. Now, Shamgar ben Anas only rules for 1 year. He takes on the leadership of the Jewish people, and then he dies within the year. But one thing he was able to do is at that time period, he was able to stop the encroachment of the Philistines, who were basically in the Gaza Strip. The modern-day Gaza Strip has always been a hotbed for problems over there, and they were starting to encroach into the land of Israel. They had made their way almost to where Jerusalem is today, and Shamgar was able to stop that encroachment. But that was all within his 1 year of rule. So basically, during this time period, the first 120 years of this 320-year time period of the judges, it's full of war. That's almost all we knew during that time period. Until finally a woman takes over. And that's what we needed. In 2654, on the Jewish calendar, 1107 before the Common Era, Devorah Hanaviyah, Devorah the prophetess, takes over as the leader of the Jewish people. Now, it's a debate in the Talmud over here, based on that name we're using, Shofet, if she was actually a judge, or again, that was just the name that the leaders had at this time period, therefore she was called a Shofet. Now, she had a husband by the name of Barak. He is also referred to as Lapidus. The Talmud tells us it's the same person. The book of Judges makes that not so clear, but the Talmud tells us it's the same person. Now, at that time, there was a king by the name of Yavin, who was from Tzohar. Tzohar is an area in Israel, and he was really threatening the Jewish people in a major way. It's in the north of Israel. He was one of the Canaanite kings that was still left over. And one of the reasons he was such a threat was because he had a general by the name of Sisera. And Sisera was a mighty general, and it was very threatening to the Jewish people at the time when Devorah became the Shofetes, when she became the ruler of the Jewish people. Devorah decides that she's going to put an end to this situation. She gets her husband Barak to come to take on Sisera in war. And really, this is just a common This is just a common situation of outsmarting a more powerful opponent, and also at this point Sisera had gotten sloppy with all his wins. So what Barak does is he goes to the top of Mount Tabor, of Har Tabor, and he takes up station up there. Now Sisera couldn't have it. There'd be Jews on the top of this mountain, which overlooked the whole area, which was the controlling area, the controlling point for that whole area. And so what does Sisera do? He says, "We're going to take him down," and he gets his troops in the heat of the day to start marching up the mountain of Tabor, and it's hot, and they're tired, and they get halfway up the mountain, and Barak and his troops from the tribe of Naphtali are able to just calm down and wipe them out from their exhaustion and from they had the advantage of the high point, and Sisera's army is wiped out at that point. There was only one problem. Sisera lived, and he fled. Now, Barak knew that if Sisera lived, they were still going to be in trouble. It wasn't over. He would go, he would regroup, he'd get some more men, and he would come right back after the Jewish people. So Barak pursues Sisera, and Sisera hides in the tent of Chaver Akeni. Now, Chaver Akeni is somebody who we're told remained neutral in the conflict between Tzohar, between Yavin and Sisera and the people of Tzohar and the Jewish people. So because he remained neutral, therefore Sisera figured he'd be safe in the tent of Chaver Akeni. There was only one problem, and that was again another one of the very righteous women remembered in Jewish history, that Chaver Akeni had a wife by the name of Yael. And Yael, while her husband had this neutrality with both sides, she didn't have the neutrality. So she basically seduces Sisera, feeds him milk, she seduces him, he gets tired, he falls asleep, and she takes the peg of the tent and shoves it through Sisera's head, and at that point the war is over. And we're told that through the leadership of women, through the leadership of Devorah and Yael, that the war comes to an end, and finally the Jews have 40 years of peace. The first 40 years of peace they had in over 120 years, and virtually the only 40 years of peace they have during this time period of the Shoftim, of the judges. After Devorah passes away, the next judge is somebody by the name of Gidon ben Yoash, who becomes the judge in the Jewish year 2694 and the secular year 1067 before the Common Era. Now at this point, Midian had become a threat. Midian is again to the east of Israel. That's where Moses lived when he left Egypt, when he fled from Egypt. This is a nation that challenged the Jewish people back in the Torah at the time period of Bilam. And look, they became the challenge to the Jewish people now. Now an angel comes and tells Gidon that he is going to be the one who's going to lead the Jewish people. He accepts, he gets 300 men together, and he goes after Midian. Again, through just outsmarting them, through his 300 men, he's able to take over thousands from Midian, basically through using the world's first Molotov cocktail. He goes on a sneak attack, they're freaked out by the fire, they're freaked out by the sneak attack, and he's able to subdue Midian at that point. Now, one of the other things we were told about Gidon was a righteous person. He had a total of 70 children from multiple wives and plugshim and the concubines, the pseudo-wives. And a tragic thing happens during his lifetime, and that is one of his sons from one of the plugshim, from one of the concubines, by the name of Avimelech, decides that he wants to make sure that he's the one who's going to take over after Gidon dies. So what does he do? He kills all of his 70 brothers and half-brothers, except for one who survives. And, through that, he's able to make sure he'll take over. What was interesting is Avimelech was the only sequential shofet we saw. He was the only judge that, so to speak, took over from his father. We see that, obviously, with the kings, but we did not see that in the time period of the shoftim, because usually it was just the person who rose in leadership. But he, we see, succeeds his father, but, it's not so simple. Because first of all, he already has a lot of blood on his hands from killing his brothers. He's known as a ruthless murderer. And so what he does, the Jewish people didn't want to give him the leadership. No one respected him as the leader. So he goes to the people of Shechem. And Shechem was also a place where a lot of no good happened. And he says, come on, rally with me. We'll work together. They make him the ruler. And they try and rule over the whole Jewish people. But after 3 years, even the people of Shechem see through this guy and aren't interested in him, and he is actually assassinated, and that is the end of him. So his rule is only for 3 years, and that's the end of him. Next, we have two of the judges that we know absolutely nothing about except their name and how long they lived. We have Tola ben Pua, who lived for 23 years, and we have Yair HaGiladi, who ruled for 22 years. All we know about him, besides the length of time he lived, he ruled, is that he had 30 sons, who each had 30 special horses, and they had 30 cities known as the Chavas Yair. Okay, that's what we know about him. The next person we come to is somebody named Yiftach. Now, Yiftach is an interesting guy. He's interesting to me because he's initially kind of kicked out of the family. He's from the area of Gilad. They kick him out of Gilad, and he goes away. Now, at this time, Ammon is the one threatening the Jewish people, and they come in and they try and take over the land, a certain portion of the land of Israel that they claim that's theirs. The Jews try to negotiate with them. It's not successful. It looks like it's going to lead to war. So they go to Yiftach, who is known as being a warrior, and they say, Yiftach, we need your help. He says, what do you mean? You guys threw me out. And they say, no, really, we need you. He said, fine, I'll come back and help you, but after the war, I'm staying. Don't think I'm just coming to help you win the war and then it's going to be over. I'm staying after the war. Fine. So he comes in. He's able to win the war. He's able to subdue Ammon, and then afterwards, he rules the Jewish people for a total of 6 years. Now, what's interesting is he's known for an infamous act, and that is that before he went to war, he made a vow that if he was successful in war, upon returning from war, the very first thing to come out of his house, the first living thing to come out of his house, he would sacrifice to God. Now, there's only one problem. When he got back from war, that first thing that came out of his house was his daughter. He didn't know what to do. Now, there's a concept in Judaism called Hataras Nadarim, that when you make a vow, there is a way for it to be annulled by going to a Torah scholar, and they can find what's called a Pesach. They can find an outlet for you to get out of the vow. The high priest at that time was somebody by the name of Pinchas, great name, who had been the high priest for a very long time. He's one of the people that were told lived for hundreds of years, and Yiftach should have gone to Pinchas to annul the vow. Now, Pinchas, knowing that Yiftach was in trouble, should have gone to Yiftach to annul the vow. The only problem was both of them stood on ceremony. Yiftach said, I'm the shofet, he should come to me. Pinchas said, I'm the Kohen Gadol, I'm the high priest, he should come to me. And the Talmud tells us between the two of them, the daughter unfortunately died. And that was unfortunately the end of Yiftach, the end of Pinchas as the Kohen Gadol. And that's how his time came to an end. Before that happened, though, we see that he actually had, after his war with Ammon, he had a civil war with the tribe of Ephraim. The tribe of Ephraim said, hey, you should have invited us to war. We want some of the spoils. He said, what do you mean? You could have come. And that leads to a whole conflict and a civil war. And 40,000 from the tribe of Ephraim are killed in that war. Next on the block in 2785 on the Jewish calendar, 976 before the Common Era, and the secular calendar, we have a shofet who in the book of Judges is told to us by the name of Ivsan, and the book of Judges tells us almost nothing about him. But there is actually a whole book of the writings, a book of one of the Megillas, and I'm referring to Megillas Rus, that dedicates a lot of press to him because his name is not only Ivsan, his other name is Boaz. And this is a common thing that we see people in Tanakh have different names in different places for different reasons, and the Talmud will tell us this name meant this over here and it meant that over there. But Boaz is Ivsan. And Boaz is the is the husband of Ruth. The situation is that you have a family of Elimelech, who trying to escape famine in Israel, goes to the land of Moab, and the sons, Machlon and Kilion, take wives from the Moabite girls. There's Orpah and Rus, and Machlon and Kilion die, and Melech dies, and Naomi, his wife, is ready to just go back to Israel as a destitute woman, tells both Naomi and Orpah that, you know what, there's no reason for you to come with me, I'm destitute, who knows what I'm going to find when I get back to the land of Israel, just go ahead and leave now, go back to your father's home. Orpah goes, And Ruth stays. Ruth stays with Naomi, and Orpah, we're told, that night goes and sleeps with everything that comes in her wake. And one of the products of that night of licentiousness is none other than Goliath, who we're going to meet pretty soon. Ruth stays with the Jewish people and stays with Naomi and comes back to the Jewish people. And there's a concept in Judaism that if you die childless, if a woman dies childless, she falls to what's called yibum. Yibum is often translated into English as love-right marriage. I have no idea what love-right marriage means. Therefore, we're going to stick to calling it yibum. So yibum means that if a woman dies childless, she falls to the next of kin in the family before she is, so to speak, sent free from the family. That next of kin has a choice of marrying her or performing what's called chalitzo, which is the process of releasing her from the family. The next of kin was Boaz. Actually, it wasn't Boaz. It was someone who the book of Ruth tells us is called Ploni Almoni. But Ploni Almoni didn't want to do this, so Boaz becomes the person who marries Ruth. They have a child. That child becomes the grandfather of King David. And through Ruth and Boaz, we see the eventual Davidic line, which is the line of Messiah, which is the line of kingship of the Jewish people. So even though over here in the book of Judges we know very little about Iv's son, we know a lot about him from his other name, Boaz, and we know that he's the progenitor of the kingdom of Israel that David will start next week's class. We're told about two more after Iv's son / Boaz. We're told about two more judges we know almost nothing about. Elon Hazavluni and Avdon ben Hillel. Know almost nothing about them. But then we have one of the third to last of the judges. We have one of the most famous of the judges, and that is none other than Shimshon, then Samson. He takes over in 2810 of the Jewish years, 951 before the Common Era on the secular calendar, and he rules as the shofet of the Jewish people for 20 years. Now, he is known for his superhuman strength. He tears apart a lion. He challenges the Plishtim, the Philistines, who are still a problem at this time period. And initially, he's able to be successful. But there's something very strange about Samson. And I'm not referring to the fact that he was a Nazarite, which is strange. Because he's a Nazarite, he did not cut his hair. He did not drink wine. Yes, that's very strange. But what is strange is even though he was a religious Jew, even though he was the one fighting against the Philistines, he seemed to have a thing for Philistinian women. And he marries more than one. His first wife is a Philistine, and then his second wife, known to us as Delilah, is also a Philistine. And Delilah is really just is an asset, is a mole, is there to try and help out her people against Shimshon. And her task is to try and figure out what the secret of his strength is. She tries once unsuccessfully, she tries twice unsuccessfully, and finally the third time, Shimshon lets it split, Samson lets it split. The secret of his strength is the fact that he is a Nazarite and therefore does not cut his hair. So what does Delilah do? She cuts off all his hair. And Samson loses his strength. He's captured by the Philistines. His eyes are gouged out. And at that point, the Philistines literally take over the land of Israel. They start taxing and tormenting the Jews throughout the whole land of Israel. And Samson is made a slave amongst the Philistines. But he is the one to get the final revenge. Because before it's all said and done, it was the annual party, the annual feast of the idol of Dagon, who is the main idol of the Philistines. And Shimshon, along with the other slaves and prisoners of war, are brought out on the day of the fast of Dagon to the temple of Dagon, and he's tied to the pillars. Now, what the Philistines don't know is that Samson's hair is grown back at this point. I mean, they know his hair is grown back, but they don't realize that now his strength has come back with the hair, that the Almighty has given him his strength back. So Samson ends his life with one monumental act, and he says the famous lines, Tamos nafshi ima plishtim, my soul dies with the Philistines. He's able to pull down the pillars of the temple of Dagon. The whole temple comes crashing down, killing thousands of Philistines, and at least at that time period, subduing the Philistines ever so slightly for the Jewish people. The final of the judges we're going to discuss tonight is Eli HaKohen. Eli is the high priest of the Jewish people, rules for 40 years, and at the time period, again, the Jewish people are still at war with the Philistines. At one point, the Jews take the Ark of the Covenant into the war, which was a problem. The Ark of the Covenant gets captured by the Philistines. Philistines realize all kinds of bad things happen. They send it back. And Eli had a very tough time as ruler of the Jewish people. He has two sons. His two sons will say, don't follow in the way of their father. And it's very rough for Eli. But the crowning jewel, if we will, of Eli's career is that he raises Samuel. He raises Shmuel HaNavi. Shmuel HaNavi at the age of 3 is brought to the house of Eli. Eli raises him. And we're going to see in next week's session of Back to the Past that Samuel the prophet, is the one who's going to unite the Jewish people back into one unified country and begin the process of the kingship. I'll hope you'll tune in next week as we cover the story of King Saul, the story of King David, the story of King Solomon, and hope you're enjoying this. Even though we're not on Facebook Live, you can't ask the questions, but at least post the questions on YouTube. When it does go up on Facebook, post the questions and I'll respond to them. And I look forward to seeing you next week for the next episode of Back to the Past. Everyone have a great week.